planting churches in the mission field, remember all those principles. Priesthood of all believers, every believer is a minister. Every disciple should be making disciples. Every leader should be reproducing leaders. Every church should be planting churches. No? And then very basic skills you have to teach your people also. So you're in the mission field, you share the gospel, somebody received the Lord, you need to train them how to share the gospel. Secondly, you need to show them how to make disciples, no? Because they can see that in you, then they will do the same thing. And then they will be involved in your team to be planting churches. No? So anyway, so let's continue. Well, for us Filipinos, we believe that we have also a missionary call. No? They call it, our evangelical leaders call it, the prophetic destiny of the Philippines as a missionary sending nation. And this is because of the overseas Filipino workers phenomenon, OFWs. It is believed that the Filipinos is the most scattered race in the world today. Because Chinese and Koreans will only go to places to do business. So when businesses will be okay, then they start business, they go. But Filipinos, wherever jobs are available, they go. So they go to work overseas. So at least 12 million on the record, but we believe more than that. Only POEA says all 12 million plus. Philippine Overseas Employment Administration. But many, for example, in Thailand alone, there are about 14,000 Filipino teachers. 14,000 Filipino teachers in Thailand. And many of them have not passed through government. They just go there and direct hiring. So they are not illegal actually in Thailand. They are legally working. But they did not go through recruitment through the agencies here. No, so that's why it could be 15 million, 12 to 15 million Filipinos living and working overseas. So because of this, we are seeing that God is using them also in an amazing way. That's why I call this the Filipino missionary mandate. We want to pursue our call as a missionary sending nation. No? And it's very interesting because Paul Mission had been established here to send missionaries to the nations. Over a year ago, actually the Brazil, the Southern Baptists in Brazil, their mission board, came here and met me in my office, and they were telling us that God is leading them to use the Philippines as a launching pad to launch missionaries in China, in Asia. So all the missionaries that they will be sending from Brazil that will be going to China, to Asia actually, of course including China, will go through the Philippines for 8 months. So 8 months training. 4 months will be for English, and then 4 months will be for learning more about Asian culture through Asian professors. So I connected them to the different seminaries here in the Philippines and other organizations, especially working among the Muslims, to help their missionaries prepare for Muslim areas. But anyway, we really believe that we have a special call to be sending more missionaries. We can do that alone, or we can actually do that in partnership. But the best is in partnership. Well, we are Filipinos, and just to encourage Filipinos, we tell them that Pili means pinili. Pinili means chosen actually. And Pino means refined. So we say we have been chosen and refined by God. That's why God will really use Filipinos in an amazing way in the mission field. So you have been chosen and refined by God. So God expects you to apply those principles, no? That we are learning in the mission field. Our goal is that our overseas Filipino workers will become outstanding Filipino witnesses. One of my favorite verse, Habakkuk 1:5. The Almighty God says, look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you're told. God is doing amazing things in the world. And those that I shared earlier are amazing things. How can you see, uh, 80,000 plus churches, 4 million baptized in just a matter of 20 years. How can you see the growth from 1 to 5 million in just a matter of 8 years in China? No, and all of those that we have been talking about. And those are just part of the many movements that's happening. So again, God desires us to be part of a movement, not a monument, okay? So when we start a church, it should be a movement. When we start ministry, it should be a movement. So God's royal priest at work. You're a royal priest, okay? So just to encourage us, especially the Filipinos, would you believe that 30% of all seafarers in the world are Filipinos? For every 3 seafarer, 1 is a Filipino. But what is very interesting here is that the ship captain, who is the Filipino ship captain, who is a believer, said, "I'm not just the captain of the ship, but I'm also the evangelist here. I am the disciple maker here. Then eventually I can see a church planted here." So what happened? As a result, we now have almost 300 churches on the ocean. So we have floating churches, because they call it floating churches. So we have churches planted, land-based churches. We have floating churches. In fact, one Christian pilot was making a joke. We are also thinking how to plant a church in the air. You know, always talking about church planting. But anyway, this guy, this guy, he has his book actually, Once an Arafat Man. He's a PLO guy, Palestinian Liberation Organization guy. This is the most notorious terrorist group before. Now it's the ISIS, right? But before it was the PLO, Yasser Arafat. No? And you know, this guy, instrumental for him coming to Christ is the Filipino nanny, actually. Yeah. So I don't have time to work on details, but there's that book. You can buy it on Amazon or eBay, Once an Arafat Man. Well, maybe over free time we can talk, but I don't have time for details in this session. But it's amazing how God used a Filipina nanny, no, to influence her to Christ. This is a testimony of one Saudi lady who is now a believer. You know, I have a Filipino housemaid. She sings all the time and looks so joyful. I asked her what she was saying about, and she explained she was singing songs of praise and thanksgiving to God for Jesus. I asked her to tell me more about him, and through her witness, I became a Christian. And she said, my husband became a Christian, and all my children became Christians, and many of my friends and relatives became Christians because of our Filipino housemaid. This was actually reported in the website of John Piper. So it's not me just giving this report. This was documented by the Lausanne movement. And no other than the CEO, Michael O., who is an American, Japanese, Korean, 3 nationalities. That's why they have chosen him. So he can raise resources from America, from Korea, and from Japan. No? Very, very wise move. But yeah, he was the one who reported about this. Well, God is using Filipinos in the Kingdom of Bahrain. God is using Filipinos in Qatar. This guy works with Emirates Airlines before. And it's very interesting, he said, that our Qatari friends get sick. In spite of medical advancements, they don't get healed. But when, you know, they see Filipinos, they say, I know you're a Christian. I know you're a Filipino. You're a Christian. Can you pray to your God to heal me? And God just worked wonders. And that opened doors for them to talk about, you know, Christ and who He is. This is one of the gatherings we had in Hong Kong. 856. We gathered them. We heard stories how the whole Buddhist family, how the whole atheist family came to know Christ through the Filipina nannies and housemaids. And praise God, by the end of the day, 116 went to the altar, making a commitment to Christ. Lord, use us as well. In Macau, I met this lady. She was instrumental. The whole Buddhist family where she works as a housemaid are now believers. Wow. And they are now attending one of the Chinese churches in Macau. In Singapore, here is Mr. Wong. Mr. Wong is a Singaporean. Stanley is a Singaporean also. He's a missions mobilizer. So when Stanley learned I'm going to Singapore, he said, I will make arrangements for you to meet Mr. Wong. No? By the way, that's my wife. I brought my wife in this trip. And I asked Stanley, why do you want me to meet Mr. Wong? And he said, I want you to meet him because Bioli, the one with long hair, their housemaid, had been serving the Wong's family for 27 years. So anyway, we visited, and we were waiting for Mr. Wong. I asked Bioli, what did you do? She told me, Pastor, for the last 10 years, I've been praying for Mr. and Mrs. Wong, that they will come to know the Lord. Secondly, I also pray that we can build our church back in the Philippines. We have a very small church. We want to have a bigger facility. So what happened? After 10 years of praying, Mr. Wong got sick. And the doctor said he is going to die. So that's the answer to the prayer. Don't let Bioli pray for you. Anyway, but that was the open door. So Bioli tell Mrs. Wong, Ma'am, can you tell Mr. Wong to give me permission to pray for him? Because I know if I pray for him, my God can heal him. What a faith. I said, I may not be able to say that if I'm in her place. But looking at 10 years of prayer, if she prayed for 10 years consistently, she believed God will really answer her prayer. Because she could have stopped on the 5th year. And she could say, oh, this family hopeless. Stop praying for them. No, but no. She believed by faith that God brought her in that home, in that workplace, so that God can use her to be a blessing. So she began praying. And keep praying for 10 years. And of course, prayed for Mr. Wong. And when we visited, I just realized that Mr. Wong was diagnosed to die 10 years ago. So he already lived for 10 years because of the prayers of Bioli. So what is important is they came to know the Lord. And so, Mr. and Mrs. Wong, by the way, they are architects, both of them. They have a construction company, a big one. 80 workers in their office. I'm a civil engineer before I became a pastor. So we were only 12 in our office, engineers and architects. We have a lot of projects. So when you say 80, oh, that's a big one. So Mr. Wong was very happy. No, he was like restored to health, and then came to know the Lord. So he commissioned several of his engineers and architects to go to the place of Bioli in gratitude. No? So he funded the rebuilding of the church, 23 million pesos. Mr. Wong paid for everything. So that's the church on the right. He also built actually the Christian education building and the parsonage for the pastor. Because the pastor trained Bioli. Imagine Mr. Wong was telling me, Pastor, every day I tell my housemaid Bioli, tomorrow tell me another Bible story. Tomorrow tell me another Bible story. I mean, it's very humbling for a Singaporean, very wealthy guy to tell me that my disciple is my housemaid. Yes. But you will see the humility of Mr. Wong. And how he had grown and how grateful he is for Bioli. So, looking at Bioli, wow, very skinny. Humanly speaking, you will never believe that God can use her. You know, as humans, we tend to judge people by the looks, by the size. Why are you looking at me? Yeah, really, no, we have our way of gauging. Will this be effective? Will this be good? But what is, when you look at Bioli, even when I saw her, oh, Lord, you are really humorous. You use people. I mean, that's why the Bible says God will use the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. No, you're looking at ordinary Bioli, very ordinary lady, but God used her in an amazing way, because ordinary Bioli is serving an extraordinary God. Amen. So when you go to the mission field, don't look at the mirror and say, "Will God use me?" Because God definitely have called you. No, you are in this training. You have prayed about this. People have been praying for this. Therefore, I believe and I believe, no, God has really called you. No, you were not just pushed by somebody to be part of the training, but really called to do that. And don't underestimate yourself, because the God of Bioli is the same God who will be with you. The God who used Bioli will be the same God who will use you. Don't underestimate yourself, and don't be ashamed of the gospel. I mean, Bioli was prayed for the employers. No? So sometimes we tend to also just go to people that are, like lower than us, or people that we can, but in your network of influence, God placed you there. Just like the Apostle Paul, he was working with, who was Priscilla and Aquila, right? They owned the business. They were buying and selling, trading for tents. And Paul was just a tent maker. He was just one of the workers. But he was instrumental for the employers to come to know Christ. And we are seeing this happening also with our overseas Filipino workers. God is using them. So in this case, Bioli. No? So anyway, Bioli was so blessed also because Mr. Rome was very happy. Oh, he built the house of Bioli, 2.4 million pesos, no, as a gift of Bioli. And Mr. Wong funded a ministry in Nepal. That's the training center that they built, and of course, church. This is the church they built in Kiev, in Ukraine. The training center this is in Cambodia. This is the 5th church that they planted in Hainan, China, because Mr. and Mrs. Wong are from Hainan, China, before they migrated to Singapore, and many other projects. Now, why did this happen? Because there was one Bioli, faithful Bioli, committed Bioli, who made herself available. Bioli who never underestimated herself. A Bioli who realized she is a royal priest. A Bioli who realized that she is a minister. She is a disciple maker. That she should be making disciples. I mean, discipling a very wealthy, not bad. No? She was given a house. Every time I think of Bioli, I'm just amazed. God can use ordinary people. So never underestimate yourself. In the mission field, you may be intimidated with people, like these are influential people, these are big people, but God is there, even way ahead of you, preparing the hearts and minds of people. So believe God can use you. These two ladies, we sent them to Japan 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago. They now started 4 Japanese congregations. Even the Japanese churches are amazed. Hey, why is this happening? Because they hardly plant even one church in 10 years. So they have now 4 Japanese congregations, and it's growing. So I asked the ladies, what's your strategy? They said, we win the Filipino wives. And through the Filipino wives, we win the Japanese husbands. Amen. There are 220,000 Filipinos in Japan. 70% are married to Japanese. So now you know. No? So they win the Filipino wives, and through the Filipino wives, they win the Japanese husband. Nothing is impossible with God. Amen. So here, these Filipinas, they win the Filipino wives, and through the Filipino wives, they win the Japanese husbands. So we call them OFW, Outstanding Filipino Wives. See, this church here was started by a Filipina married to Japanese. So a mixed congregation now with Filipino, Japanese. This church was started also by a Filipina married to Japanese, and many other churches actually. So we praise God for that, that they are planting churches as well. Now, these Filipinas are not seminary graduates. These are not seminary graduates. But just know how to share the gospel. They just know how to make disciples. They just know how to lead Bible study groups or small groups. And that's what they did. And eventually it resulted to churches planted. I had the joy of meeting one of the pastors, JIL, Jesus is Lord, in Taiwan, 2012. I asked him, what are you doing here? Are you a full-time missionary of JIL? And he said, no. Actually, Pastor, I'm a factory worker. And I said, you mean you came here as a factory worker, not as a church planter, not as a missionary? He said, yes. I came here as a church, as a factory worker. So how did you start a church? So he told me, well, in our factory, I asked my co-workers, anybody of you who wants to join my prayer group. Yeah, I'm starting up a group of men who will be praying so we can pray for one another and pray for our families. So several joined. And they would claim Bible verses when they pray. So eventually it became a Bible study group. And now it's a church. No? When I went there, 2012. Last month I shared this to a group of pastors, and Bishop Leo Alconga was there. I don't know if you know Bishop Leo, but he is one of the known Christian leaders here and very close to Brother Eddie. In fact, he was invited during the anniversary of JIL in Taiwan. And he told me there were already 3,000 plus who attended the church anniversary. I don't know if it's just from this one church or there were other churches that were established and together they met. But what is important is the church grew and started not by a missionary but by a royal priest who understood that he was an evangelist. He was the disciple maker there, di ba? God placed him in that factory, not just to make dollars, but to make disciples. So he was actually telling me the secret is that they were told, whenever God brings you, don't attend a church, but start one. Wow. So he did not join a church. He started one in a factory. In March, I was in Dubai, and I was just amazed about what God is doing. There were 5 domestic helpers. In the Philippines, they share the gospel, they make disciples, they handle small groups. So that's their lifestyle. Wherever you bring them, they will do the same thing. Now they are in Dubai. So, what to do? Oh, share. Make disciples. And then start the small groups. After some time, the pastors said, hey, we can bring them together. So they started the church. Now, more than 500 are attending the church. And they now have a full-time worker, and they are now beginning to reach out even to non-Filipinos in Dubai. Very simple, royal priest mindset. Did those basic ministries. And there are more than 500 Filipino churches in Dubai alone. This guy here, in the middle, the one kneeling, is an engineer actually. This is one of their, every night they have like prayer groups that meet in their place to pray. So I was there for just 7 days, so I cannot really be in many churches on Sunday. So I have to meet them different days and different times. So this was nighttime we were there. This was like a prayer meeting 10 to 12 in the evening. From work they would go and then they would just pray. Of course they don't do this every night. No, because one group can do it, will do it Monday, another group on Tuesday, and so. But at least once a week they will do that. But this engineer started it, not a church planter, an engineer. Here also started by a professional, the one there with eyeglasses. I spoke in the church Sunday, and then this lady beside me is actually the manager of band, Filipino bands that sings in 5-star hotels, So she's the manager, and this lady is a supervisor of Emirates Airlines, flight attendant, no? So a flight attendant and the manager of musical band are pastoring, handling a church. They 4 of them in the team actually are pastoring the church. So when I was there, we sat down. Okay, what are your needs? What are your concerns? And then we try to address, help them. Okay, these are things that can be done. Give them more trainings and more skills to help them. So very excited. No, we're also excited because in spite of their busy schedule, they really make time for ministry. These are actually professionals, no? Computer guys, teachers, and office workers. These are nurses, actually. These are professionals and office workers that we also train. This is in Abu Dhabi. This is a group in Dubai, no? Yeah, many others. These are just part of some of the groups that we train. But so many churches were planted and established by royal priests. So disciples making disciples, leaders reproducing leaders, churches planting churches. And here they are not just planting churches there, but they are actually beginning to plant churches back in the Philippines to their loved ones. I was in Texas late last year, and I met this guy, the one with the wife. He's a nurse, pastor. He's pastoring a church, married to a nurse. It was their church anniversary, so they invited me to speak. So I was so excited when I met them and begin to understand the history of the church. So this is the church anniversary for about half. They have more than 80 people. Half of them are in the church, half of them are in the hospital. Not because they are sick, because most of the members are nurses or working in the hospital. See, Pastor Pete is a nurse. The wife is a nurse. So where they work, that's their mission field. So they share the gospel. They disciple. So two of them, they have many disciples, so they started the church. More than 80. They own the facility. They don't have debts. They bought it cash. They have money. No? So nurses started it. No, they were not trained as missionaries. They were never trained as church planters really. But they just obey the Lord. This guy is a public school teacher, married to a nurse. So they also started the church. The following Sunday, I was in another church, in another city in southern Texas. And they have started the church. More than 120 attending the church. And they own the facility. They bought the facility. Nurses and teachers are well paid in America. So they have money. Who are the members? Teachers, nurses, and of course their families and friends, because that's their network. So where you live, where you work, where you study, if every believer will just have that mindset, there's a higher purpose, that will make a big difference. So teach this when you start churches, when you start missionary work. Manila Metropolitan Baptist Church, the pastor is a very good friend of mine. So when I visited the church, there is the lobby, and there's the world map, no? And there are cities and countries in that's lighted. So like Dubai, and then Australia, Singapore. So I asked the pastor, "What do you mean? What's the significance of this?" And he told me, every city or country that's there, we have a church. He said, we have 210 churches already. In fact, he told me, we have to update all of this because many have not been listed yet. So 210. So I asked him, how many of these were planted by your missionaries? And he said, less than 10. So what happened? The more than 200 were planted by their members who became overseas Filipino workers, and their members who migrated. So I asked the pastor, how did that happen? He said, we are telling our members, you need to learn here how to share the gospel. You need to learn how to make disciples. You need to learn here how to start small groups, Bible study groups. And wherever God brings you, you do the same. So what was the result? Churches. I mean, not low-cost budget. They did not spend for sending missionaries. They just spend investing in the lives of people, training and equipping them. And those members who are now working overseas and now started churches are the ones actually helping the mother church. You go to their mother church in Manila, it's so beautiful. royal priest mindset. Every disciple making disciples. Every leader reproducing leaders. Every church planting churches. If that's the mindset, this can happen. Now just imagine if all churches in the Philippines will do this. More than 1 million of the OFWs are believers. If they will do this, there should be so much churches planted by Filipinos. And others are coming back here, so they should be able to help plant churches locally in the Philippines. So more than 200 churches already. So you see the importance, if we really understand why we exist, why the church exists, that we are not a monument, we are a movement, that we should reproduce, that we should grow, that we should multiply. These are the concepts that we need to understand and incorporate